would very much like to sort of fool around, take a few calls. Chad in Oklahoma, you're on with Professor Ward.
Hey, Art, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Chad.
It's the first time I've called you. I've listened to you for a long time. Professor, how do you change the way the parts remain of carbon dioxide is in the air without putting us back in the horse and buggy air? How do you get?
Yeah, great question. And one of the things that I've been really struck by is when I'm talking to engineering colleagues and listening to other people talk about this, is that sure enough, there's going to be great challenges to our economy if we stop industrialization. You're right, we go back to the horse and buggy. On the other hand, why don't we look at this from the capitalistic point of view? The country that figures out first how to really make equipment greener, the way that you have solutions to this is going to require entirely new ways of engineering, entirely new ways of manufacturing. Somebody's going to get there first, and whoever gets there first gets there rich. China is trying its darndest right now to come up with engineering solutions on how to reduce greenhouse emissions and yet at the same time keep productivity up. It's that sort of solution, I think. I mean, look at Toyota. Toyota has become the number one auto seller in the world. It's not just their hybrids, but that has certainly helped because they have very quickly adapted to the marketplace, and the U.S. automakers have not. We have to be nimble, I think, in terms of business and certainly in terms of engineering.
Well, that was the last time our automakers got in trouble. When gas prices went up in the 70s, the Japanese cars sold, everything else was a dinosaur. You could hardly get a cent for it. And now we appear to be approaching that point again, and U.S. automakers are not on top of it again.
No, absolutely right. No,
I don't get it. On the one hand, companies make what people want, and it is fair to look around and say, look at all the U.S. SUVs around. That seems to be what people want.
Well, there's one place on Earth where they really do help. I just spent 4 blessed months in Australia, and I was up at the north end, a place called Broome. They have a wet season, and in the wet season, they get so muddy, the roads disappear, and everybody has Land Rovers, and I realized why. If you get stuck out there, they've got all these nasty saltwater crocodiles, the salties, and you really don't want to be stuck walking home with your car in the bog or in that sort of country. But other than that, there's not really a need for all those suburban SUVs that we have in America.
Well, there may not be a need, but there's a want, and that's all it takes. I mean, if people want them, then U.S. automakers are going to make them. But once again, they're going to be surprised. The gas prices are already moving into a place where lots of people are beginning to say, you know, I can't handle this. Our family budget can't handle this, and so we're going to have to get a smaller car. So we're kind of right back where we were in the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard that it's now costing $1,000 more per year for the typical family just on gasoline. I mean, that's a hit.
Oh, that's a hit, all right. A lot of people in trouble. And the way our country is set up, you know, we like to live in the burbs and drive to work. So I just, in my wildest dreams, I cannot imagine, Professor, how we're going to, you know, in a way, I understand what the current administration is doing, and it's like they're kind of like they're in denial. And I can't say that I blame them because I don't. Kind of like that last caller said, how are we going to do this without sliding back to an earlier day that nobody's going to like?
Well, it's going to be the great challenge to us from an engineering point of view. In my own city, I'm seeing more and more bicycles emerging. The downside of that is because we have more cars at the same time, there's an awful lot of nasty car-bike wrecks going on around here.
Well, of course, and I'm not prepared to go to a bike. I live out here where I've got to have a car.
Yeah, absolutely. The western cities are going to be the worst off. You know, the old eastern cities where they're all piled up on one on top of the other, actually, those may become the cities of the future again, where you can walk to the corner store, where we don't have giant supermarkets because we do get out of our cars because they're about to charge people to drive in New York City. That's going to really change things in there, too, from a city point of view.
Majority of people, I think, in New York City don't own a car.
And absolutely.
Where to park it,
Where would you park it?
That's right. Doug in Hollywood, California, I presume, west of the Rockies. You're on the air.
Yes, that's me. It's an honor to be on your show, Art, and it's an honor to be able to ask you a question, Mr. Ward. I have your book, Life and Death of Planet Earth, and what I wanted to ask you is, how do you know that this particular episode of global warming is not part of a cycle that we've noticed over the last, let's say, I think it was about every 500 years ago, or 500 years or so, we noticed global cooling as from around 1100 to the 1600s when the Earth cooled down significantly, and then we had the little ice age, and then after that, the Earth has been warming up again, and that appears to be a cycle. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and that's one of the, you hear all types of criticism to the whole global warming and carbon dioxide.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing the science. I'm just wanting to put a question out there, because I want to know both sides of the issue.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that there are cycles, and the scientists who look at this have to be really careful to try to divest any sort of analysis, get those cycles out of there. The way I've seen it responded to by the climate people I respect is that, yes, we had the little ice age, and we've had these ups and downs, but where we are now in CO2 is well higher, well beyond anything that took place in the little ice age all the way back to 10, 12,000 years ago. You know, Al Gore in his movie showed that graph at the end. Still, he's dead on. In some things, I don't think he was very accurate, but on that one he is that we've moved out of sort of the ping pong up and down, the 180 to 250 in parts per million of CO2 that led to those short-term climate events. And we're beyond that.
Now, you see, Professor, you mentioned the name Al Gore.
Yep.
Now, I can guarantee you that just mentioning the name Al Gore will obliterate the thinking processes of a third of the listeners right there. I mean, they are so upset with Al Gore, they hate him so much that they will say, oh, if he's saying anything about Al Gore, then I'm turning the radio off. I guarantee it. That's the kind of message I'll get.
Well, have him call. I love this. Let's have some give and take here.
Okay, we'll get it. Caller, is that enough of it? I think what the caller wants to know is the ice ages and the climate changes come and going, the natural cycles. How positive are we that we can pin X number of percentage on human beings above and beyond any cycle going on?
Yeah, again, it's a really fair question. I guess the response is that we have so much more CO2, and that we could directly relate that to human activities. This isn't the Earth spitting out more. That's been pretty constant. But you go back, the Industrial Revolution of 1800 was the point at which it just really started climbing out the window. And then with the 1950s and the huge run-up in human population, it accelerates. So you really can correlate the acceleration of industrialization to this acceleration of the rise of atmospheric CO2.
Caller?
Seems like cause and effect to me.
Yeah. Caller?
Hello.
Anything else?
I was curious, at what point in human history, Earth history, can you go back to see a level of CO2 similar to or comparable to what we have today?
Okay.
Yeah, I think what the last time we had is really on the downward slide, and this was probably the Pliocene, which would have been, I have the CO2 curve in this most recent book I wrote, and the CO2 curve, if I can remember, is probably about 10 million years ago. It's on the downward slope. It finally gets down to the point where we plug into the ice ages. As you know, if you saw Life and Death of Planet Earth, it's really life that keeps sequestering all the carbon dioxide. It's so funny, it's ironic that here we worry about too much carbon dioxide, and yet really the end of life on this planet will be from too little carbon dioxide. Human challenge is to be to regulate it. And we're going to bring it down now, but in the future, our challenge will be to bring it back up again.
All right. Mike in Livermore, California. You're on with Professor Ward.
Art, you made my day now. I finally got through to you.
Good.
Hey, and before I ask my question, I have a theory of my own that I've always had, and I want to tell you that the dinosaurs' extinction was caused by themselves. Because what is one of the heavy
Methane.
methane. So, and what do dinosaurs, most of them, the biggest ones, eat? They eat greens, and what result of that is?
Methane.
Flatulence and methane. So they basically farted themselves to death. But it's a great honor to talk to Mr. Ward here, and I wanted to ask him.
It's a good story you told, but I don't think that's how it happened.
No, I doubt it either. It's my little joke.
Oh, come on, Gary Larson said it was smoking, and why not?
Yeah, why not? Listen, let's get back to what the last caller was talking about and the cyclical of it. What about the sun and the fact that it's heating up the Earth's core, and from that we're getting more volcanic activity, and can that be correlated to any of the CO2 that rise? Because we did have some major volcanic activity in the 1800s that you're talking about when the rise started happening.
Yeah, the sun is getting warmer. I mean, that's absolutely true. It's 33% more energetic. More energy comes from it and hits the Earth now than it did when the Earth was formed. But the volcanic activity is really independent of the sun. Although it warms the planet, it doesn't warm the deep parts of the planet that would cause volcanic activity. That's all the radioactive stuff.
No, but what about the atmosphere, though?
Well, it's still not enough to get down. It's a trivial rise in atmosphere. You know, it's hideous to us, but if the atmosphere is like 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Fahrenheit, doesn't matter. It's not going to heat up rocks deep down in any way close enough to cause any more volcanic.
Yes, okay, but what about the sun as an agent in what we're calling global warming?
Now that's a much better question.
Okay.
One of the most relevant and interesting critiques of all is, could the global warming cycles that we're seeing actually be related not to carbon dioxide, but solar cycles themselves? And
yes.
And the last year, there's been a lot of give and take on this particular one. And on the surface of it, it seems like a pretty good criticism. But we do not see records, these records that we can relate back to. When people have been watching sunspots, for instance, for the last 150 years or more, we don't see, for instance, anything that correlates sunspot activity, and we know sunspots themselves are correlated to the sun's activity of becoming quiescent and then becoming more stormy and going quiescent.
Yeah.
Those don't relate. They don't correlate at all to the climate cycles that we see in the planet. Now, maybe we have pulses of the sun that were more energetic before human history, before we've had a record of it. Well, we just can't answer that one. But at least the solar people that I know, and I've asked them explicitly, and they say, no, I don't think so.
No, we're at a solar minimum right now.
Yep.
And we have still been noting these outrageous temperature hikes going on. So...
there you go.
Yeah, there you go indeed. How much of a possibility, Professor, is it that scientists like yourself are wrong? How much possibility is left that you're wrong?
Well, I'm sure I'm wrong about a lot in this world. In terms of the whole issue of global warming, there are so many individual aspects to it that I bet I'm wrong about a lot of it. The easiest thing is to be wrong about are the estimates of when things are going to happen. I mean, you know as well as I do that forecasting the future is a very tough business. But the overall trends, I bet I'm not wrong. And the sequence of events, I think I'm probably right on. And again, at the end of this book I've just written, Under a Green Sky, I just lay out, as best I can see it, what the next 1,000 years is going to look like.
All right, Professor, hold it right there. We've got to take a break. Professor Peter Ward is my guest. We will be right back. Here I am. I think all of us want to know if this is real. Don't we? You know, you see stories about dead zones in the ocean. Areas in the ocean where nothing lives, where nothing can live, because there's either no nutrients or no oxygen or dead zones in the ocean. Scary as hell. You hear about, I read a story not long ago about, I believe it said that if nothing changes, there'll be no fish left in the ocean. in 50 years. No fish left in the ocean in 50 years. Well, that's scary stuff. In a moment, we'll ask Professor Ward about exactly that. So, Professor, there were stories about no more fish in the ocean in 50 years if we don't change what we're doing. Dead zones, reading all about those all the time. Whales and other sea animals behaving in strange ways. The oceans seem as though they're changing. What's going on?
Yeah, these dead zones are really spooky, aren't they?
They are.
We've got them in smaller bodies of water. There's a place called Hood Canal in my state, Washington State, that's entirely dead now. But the Gulf of Mexico has them, and these are big areas of water where the oxygen is out. They move along as coherent sort of bodies of water separated for the oxygenated water. And indeed, they can enlarge and do, and when they cover over a sea bottom, for instance, all of even the in-fauna, the stuff that lives buried within the sediment dies off. These are, of course, due to overproduction of the water. If you have too much nitrate and phosphate, you get animals living like crazy, plants blooming away, and then they use up the nutrients and die, and they rot. And yet there's so many animals and plants that the rotting uses up every bit of oxygen, and that bit of water goes anoxic. Now let's imagine, Art, that all of the oceans in the world turn into that same situation where there's so much dead, rotting stuff. Well, that's the future in a globally warmed world.
All right. I'm going to just sort of keep bringing in calls, and we'll see what we get. Diana in Florida, you're on with Professor Ward.
Thank you, Art. Sir, I have all the respect for you, but I'm worried because when we put out CO2, or whatever it is, I'm not smart like you, carbon dioxide, plants need that to live. So then they give off oxygen in return. And you talked about India and China. Okay, they're not on Mars, and Mars is heating up. So I have a feeling that this has more to do with the sun, and I think that people are just trying to cash in on it by causing a global tax on carbon dioxide, and then also on making money on fuel-efficient cars, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, you make a lot more money on the SUVs than you do on smaller cars. Not sure about that one, but...
Yeah, well, that's a good point about that global warming on Mars. We should touch on that, because
Yeah, let's.
that is an interesting story that people are using to say the sea is caused by the sun has warmed up everything. If Mars warmed up at the same time the Earth is warming up, well, that must show that it's the sun. But some of my NASA buddies have gone back and really taken a good hard look at those data, and they're not standing up to scrutiny. I mean, the comment about carbon dioxide, and perhaps it's just this whole thing is being led by some big business or governmental group trying to make money. I come from the 60s. I'm paranoid as anybody. But even now, the evidence to me suggests that's probably not the case. This thing really is real.
Okay. Let's move to Costa Mesa, California. And Steve, you're on the air with Professor Ward.
Well, hi, Art.
Hi.
Hey, glad to have you.
I read a book about 10 years ago called Entropy. I don't remember who it was by, but you can guess where I'm going with this. The guy pretty much said that we reach a watershed with every energy thing, with coal, with wood. We're going to do the same thing with fossil fuels. And I'm just wondering where it's going to go. I mean, we're always going to have some kind of energy source, and it's going to cause some kind of problem. What are we going to do?
What are we going to do? Well, that's a pretty good question, Professor. What are we going to do?
Well, it's a great question. Where's the energy going to come from?
That's right.
Just coming off Australia, I was seeing a huge area of land with very few people in it. And what I saw taking place there is that they had a combination of giant solar fields and big wind generating machines that were fueling small villages. So what they're trying to do is use the local sources around them instead of trying to build a plant that's large enough to power an entire city is do it small and do it locally and try to generate power around you. And also in Australia, they have people now that are putting solar panels on their roof and generating enough electricity that they're starting to sell it. Instead of they're buying electricity, they can start selling electricity. It's not cheap to put these panels on. It takes you about 10 years of selling to break even. But after that, you're making money. And so there are solutions. And this is, of course, a very sunny place. But it's a case where Australian industry said, hey, let's jump on this. There's no reason why we can't have this all over Arizona, California, anywhere where we have
Nevada.
positions.
Yeah, Nevada. My state is full of lots of things. A lot of federal land, about 90% of it federal land. And we have lots of wind, and Professor, we have lots of sun. And we would have very few objections to wind generators and solar panels and or anything else that the BLM would decide could be put on their land.
Well, it's the way to go.
It is. Why we're not going there is a separate question altogether. Let's go to Jim in Houston, Texas. You're on the air.
Hi, Art. It's a true joy to be able to talk to you. Been a fan of yours for a dozen years or more.
Thank you.
I love most of the stuff you do. But on this point, gentlemen, I think that we've stopped looking at information that doesn't agree with your point of view. There's a book, I was told not to tell the title, but by Fred Singer and Dennis Avery, supported by meteorological societies in Canada, United States, and Australia, and for that matter, the state meteorologists in Oregon and I believe it's Delaware. And they say that the CO2 cause for global warming is, and they debunk it on every page of their book by scientific reasoning and scientific research.
All right, well, can you quote a couple of the debunking points for us?
Okay, what I want to say in terms of points is, number one, you mentioned palm trees in the Arctic. Let's say that happens again. There's green stuff growing where it's not growing today. So if you take away the Mississippi Delta, but you open up all of northern Canada, which is many times larger than our breadbasket, and for that matter, you open up Russia, which is many, many times larger than the United States. And all that dark earth that you say is going to be exposed, you've got some land there that's available for cultivation. So the idea that we're not going to have land to cultivate is just hype.
Or maybe it should be said a different way. Maybe a different way. There'll be land to cultivate. It just won't be the land we're cultivating now.
Correct.
Okay, Professor?
The idea that we won't.
Yeah, it's a great point. And actually, I was thinking about the same thing a couple of months ago. I tried to do some calculations on just how much new land would become available. It's really tough because it turns out you have to figure out what crops will grow at what latitudes. The two big ones, of course, would be Antarctica and Greenland. Let's say we get all the ice gone. The problem with both of those is that when all that ice melts, the land rises. And so you have this sort of rebound effect taking place. But before that happens, it's still very depressed. And in both cases, we'll have large inland seas that cover it. And before we can turn it into a Great Lake scenario, you're going to get a salt lake in there, and you could never grow anything on it. With some engineering, you could certainly engineer your way around that. I think what we'd have to do is to ensure, because you're absolutely right. We are going to have new places that we will cultivate, and we're absolutely going to have to cultivate them. The downside of it is, even though you've got a globally warmed world, you still have the problem of at high latitudes of a shortened growing season. You've got all winter of darkness. I don't care if it's warm or cold or whatever, you still can't grow plants. And so the closer you get to the equator, the larger the growing season that you have.
That's quite true.
It's short, so it doesn't work out.
Caller, you might not have thought of that, but if you take a trip far up north, you'll find out he's quite right, and the growing season is horrendously short. So I'm not sure it would be a case where we could just say, well, all right, we can't grow this in the U.S. anymore, but we'll grow it up in northern Canada or Greenland or whatever.
may I make one more point?
Yeah, sure.
You get warmer temperatures in the atmosphere. Warmer air holds more moisture. Therefore, all that feet and feet and feet of sea rise, some of that's going to be taken up by simply more humidity in the air worldwide. So I don't see the great rise in the oceans. Also, when you take into account that if all the icebergs melted today, you wouldn't raise the ocean an inch because 9/10 of them are in the water, and when they melt,
Wait a minute, caller. The ice in Greenland's not in the water. The ice at the Antarctica is not in the water.
I understand.
Oh, okay. Well, if you melt the ice in Greenland and you melt the ice in the Antarctica, Peter, what do we have?
240 feet, the estimate
240 feet
of rise.
of rise. Yes. Caller.
What about the fact that warmer air holds more moisture?
Yeah, but that's trivial. It holds more moisture, but it's still present as a gaseous form. And gas is a very dispersed cylinder molecule that is so different from liquid. It would have an absolutely trivial effect on sea level rise.
Okay. All right. To Jim in Montana, you're on with Professor Ward.
Thank you, Art, Professor Ward. I was wondering if the professor could address the fact that there have been reports that only 2% of the CO2 emitted into the atmosphere is created by mankind.
I'm not familiar with that particular statistic, and I think that's a way underestimation from what I understand. It's really tough measurement to get because you've got volcanic sources, of course, and the only way you can get an estimation of CO2 coming out of the volcanoes is to measure a few of them over a rate of time and then do an estimate for what all of them would have to be. But there's a reverse calculation you can do that suggests that's totally not correct. And this is simply looking at the base level of CO2 before humans were around. I mean, we know what that is over long periods of time. It fluctuates up and down, up and down. But again, it goes from about 180 to about 220 or 240. But as soon as we humans start sitting around here doing our industry, we pretty much doubled that. And so we can look at the amount of time because CO2, it also is taken out of the atmosphere. Plants use it, it's a sink and this and that. But the calculations suggest there's a whole lot more than 2% that humans are doing. It's way more than that.
Yes, but I mean, if you look at, you said earlier that there have been 5 mass extinctions that weren't caused by a meteor hit, correct?
Yep, probably 14 actually.
And most of those, or at least some of those, could be attributed to CO2 releases from the ocean?
No, it's probably they're coming from big volcanic events. But here's where I need to clarify that, and I'm glad you brought that up. These things took place during times when there were things called flood basalts. This isn't a normal volcano. A flood basalt is giant cracks in the ground opening up, and enormous amounts of lava come pouring out. For instance, the whole eastern part of Washington State is all basalt. It all came out about 30 million years ago. Russia, 1/4 of Siberia is covered by basalt that came out over 1 million years. That's the same time that the Permian extinction took place. The entire east coast from New York up into the Palisades, all of that is basalt that came out and covers a huge area of the Atlantic under the seabed. That came out at the same time we had the Triassic mass extinctions. So these flood basalts are short-term times when so much lava comes out. But it's not the lava, it's the carbon dioxide that comes out of these big vents. And so these are short-term, and there are 1 million years when we have these big CO2 events, and then they stop. They're generated by magma. And so we're doing the equivalent of a flood basalt right now. That's what humans are up to.
Okay. All right. This is interesting. East of the Rockies, it's Dale in Las Vegas. How did you get on the east of the Rockies line, Dale?
Well, I got confused, actually. I moved out here to listen to your show better. Anyway, I worked on the Super Collider for a while, and I worked in high-energy physics at the University of Houston, and we had a problem with bogus scientists, or bad science fiction, passing off as science. And a lot of times we'd have to just eliminate them from our group. A lot of them got into law. chameleon change to where they started researching things like this, global warming, where they can make people believe the end of the world is near, and suddenly the funding comes for them. And a lot of them forsake scientific principles. They're more on the radio than in the lab. And even the FBI came and investigated our lab for a while because we had a problem with that. The members of the New World Order, George Norrie brought up some things about how it ties in with certain legal things that are happening now. The world is changing, but I don't fear the global warming as much as the political changes going on that involve a lower standard of living and sacrificing our principles.
Well, I'm not sure what the question is here.
Well, it's not a question, it's a statement. I'm just saying that I've seen a lot of this sort of thing going on. It's political science, it's not science. It's
All right, there you go. Professor Ward, there's the accusation.
Well, I recommend you go on the website. There's a Scientific American article that I wrote that has an awful lot of the data explaining, and go buy my new book where all the data is laid out. Well, the scientific references are there, and I think you can see the arguments more clearly than trying to express it on radio. October 2006, Scientific American.
Well, I had a very, very good professor on not long ago who, again, said, look, if you're looking for funding, there's a lot more funding available very quickly if you're willing to sacrifice what you believe and come and speak out against global warming. That there are oil companies and such that have quite a bit of money available for that sort of thing.
Well, the funding that we get is small, and we certainly get it because we're looking at geological events, but I think what's new about our group is we're trying to at least tie up the past with the present and the future. And I think we ignore the rock record, we ignore the past history of this planet at our peril. Now, the last listener, I don't know if he's accused me of being one of these guys the FBI should pick up and carry away. You know, you call them the way you see them.
Yeah. We're getting close to the top of the hour. Professor, I'm curious. I really am curious. Have you ever been approached by anybody on the other side of the question? In other words, somebody wanting you to do a little research into whether all this is baloney.
No, I think I'm not famous enough, but no one has ever given me the chance to turn them down.
I see. All right, we'll continue with these calls, and ladies and gentlemen, what we're looking for, and we're getting, are contrarians. If you hate Al Gore, if you think this is all baloney, then you're our person. So pick up the phone and give us a call. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Professor Peter Ward is my guest from the High Desert. I'm Art Bell. Here I am. All right. I'm going to now prove my point. During break, I downloaded my email, knowing what would be there. And sure enough, Glenn, and I won't give his last name, it's not necessary, sends the following to Peter Ward. Peter Ward is a nutcase who got his data from the same junk science Al Gore did. There's not enough ice on the planet to raise sea levels more than 20 or 30 feet. God, that would be enough. Anyway, going on. Apparently, they forgot to remember that a sea under Antarctica that covers most of Antarctica and is 8,000 feet deep. If Antarctica was completely melted, most of the water would go nowhere. Here's the real story on greenhouse gases. Fully 95% of greenhouse gas is water vapor, which glow warmer apocalyptic computer models ignore. While there's less water vapor in drier climates like the Arctic and more in the tropics, averaged for all locations, water vapor is between 2 and 3% of the atmosphere, while carbon dioxide levels are 0.04%. There is 60 times as much water vapor on average in the air than CO2, which is why CO2 accounts for 3.6% of the greenhouse effect. Water vapor accounts for 95%, while methane, nitrous oxide, and other gases make the remaining 1.4%. But of course, most CO2 is produced naturally, such as by plants in the oceans, over 96.7%. In fact, human activity, those cursed gasoline engines and cars and so forth, account for some 3.2% of CO2 in the planet's air. If you multiply 3.6% times 3.2%, you get mankind's carbon dioxide contribution to the total greenhouse effect presently warming the Earth. Slightly more than 1/10 of 1%. 1/10 of 1%, that's our total contribution. All of the demands to deindustrialize America, drive less, save energy, use toilet paper on, I don't want to read the rest of that, I guess. Both you and Peter Ward and the rest of paranoid nutcases need to relax and get a grip. All the computer models are so wrong that they're a joke, and they deliberately omitted the facts to push their agenda to reduce the population to less than 1 billion. You tell him, or I will, that he is crazy as Al Gore, and the world would be much better without all of them. In fact, we can all hope that when they start the euthanasia, maybe the members of the global warming religion will volunteer to die first. Signed, Glenn. And, Professor, I want you to respond to that before we break.
Well, boy, some people really need to get a life, don't they? Or maybe just relax a little and enjoy the life that they do have. That's a lot of burrowing away at a lot of really spurious figures.
Okay, let's take a few of them. Not enough ice on the planet to raise the sea level more than 20 or 30 feet, if it all melted.
Well, you know as well as I do that when you have thousands of feet of ice on a continent as large as Antarctica, and you turn all of that ice, which is sitting on land, and dump it into the ocean, it has a huge effect.
Well, he says if Antarctica was completely melted, most of the ice would go nowhere.
Yeah, well, that's nonsense. Well, ice would be gone. If it's melted, the ice can't go anywhere because it isn't there anymore. It's water, and the water is going to go to the ocean, which is all connected, and cause a global rise.
All right, he says, let's see, fully 95% of the greenhouse gas is water vapor, which global warmer apocalyptic computer models ignore. While there is less water vapor in drier climates like the Arctic and more in the tropics, average for all locations water vapor is between 2 and 3% of the atmosphere, while carbon dioxide levels are 0.04%.
Well, what your interesting listener forgot to note is that global warming heats the entire planet, and that when he takes specific parts, like just over the desert, there's not a lot of water vapor. We're looking at a planet-wide phenomenon of warming, and we're estimating at least a planetary rise in temperature of between 4 and 6 degrees before the end of this century, at the worst of the models, or 2 to 3 in the best cases. But either way, significant rise in the entire planet's temperature. Now, it doesn't matter whether there is or there isn't water vapor. If you're looking at the entire planet, water vapor is an excellent greenhouse gas. But as the planet gets warmer, and CO2 helps it get warmer, the water vapor becomes even more efficient at helping raise temperature. So those are all just sort of nonsense figures that I...
Nonsense. Okay, Professor, we're going to break here. We'll be right back. All right, Professor Ward's book is Life as We Do Not Know It. Is that correct, Professor?
Well, that's an older one. No, the one I've got out now is called Under a Green Sky. Just came out 2 weeks ago.
Under a green sky. Is that actually what we would eventually get, a green sky?
Yeah, that title comes from, again, I was talking to David Battisti, a really great modeler, and we were talking about what the future will look like in a globally warmed world. And he was telling me about up in the Arctic, things will really be different because in the globally warmed world, his calculations show the clouds will be higher than they are now, in a position that they do not exist. He said if you look up in the sky in the Arctic, you would never see a truly clear day. And the other deal, he said, is look, I suspect the sky would take on a greenish tint. The sun running through those very high clouds would probably suddenly change the color. I mentioned this to my book editor, and they jumped all over that. He said, you mean the sky's going to change color? And I said, well, this guy thinks so. Well, they ran with it anyway. I think it's kind of fun anyway, isn't it?
I don't know if I'd call it fun. I'd call it worrisome. Jeff in Cleveland, thanks for waiting. You're on with Professor Ward.
Hi, Mr. Bell.
Yes, sir.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be on your wonderful show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My main contention here is that I think the data we're going on here is just a little bit too skinny to be making these large-scale judgments. I don't think anyone can say that, we can clearly determine right now that the world is permanently heating up or permanently cooling down with or without the help of man. But, the evidence does show that we are warming up, but we don't have a good long scale to compare it to, since we've only been here a few thousand years compared to the, millions the planet's been here before.
Professor?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. And the big worrisome aspect of this whole global warming debate is that, at least in planetary temperatures, we only have records. As your listener pointed out, not just for some of the data he's talking about with CO2, but planetary temperatures is such a short-termer. And that's why a number of us are trying to come at this problem from an entirely different data set. And this is why we want to look at past climate change, where we have longer time frames to look at. And the rock record lets us look comfortably at millennial time scales. And we can get very good numbers from the ice cores, for instance, from Antarctica. You can segregate it down into 20-year intervals of time, but you can go back over 500,000 years or even longer. And from any one of these ice cores, we can get an exact reading, plus or minus a tiny little bit, of what the carbon dioxide level was, what the oxygen content was, what the age of it was. And from these, there's a really good and accurate record. And going back into deeper time, the stuff I work on, from calcium carbonate nodules, we can work out what past CO2 levels were, and then we compare that to what the fossil record tells us. So from this, we can watch CO2 go up or down, and in times when it went really fast up, when we had these big flood assaults, we have at the same time, or soon after, big mass extinctions. So that's the point here, is the past the same. And look, when we had really rapid carbon dioxide rises in the past, it has led to mass extinction. Those rises are very similar to the rates of rise we're seeing today. Will we have another mass extinction? Who knows? But would we be derelict in not pointing out this comparison? I think so.
Owen?
My only other comment would be that is there any given the amount of data we have, can we be sure that these are all cause and effect relationships and that we're not in fact just imposing a post hoc theory here on this? That just because certain aspects are shown at these times, these great extinctions, that they were in fact the cause and not a byproduct or unrelated event.
Oh, sure. You're absolutely correct. You can never prove anything in science. You know that well. We can disprove hypotheses, and quite often, those of us speak with the greatest assurance in the world, and then bang, 5 years later, somebody comes up with something that absolutely destroys that particular paradigm, and something new has to be built.
Yeah, but there's so much at stake here.
There's a lot at stake, and we call them as we see them. And this isn't just me. This is a pretty big fraternity of geologists and climate people, and I'm just trying to bring it all together in this book. But it's certainly not all my work. It's a lot of people's work.
Well, we look at what the administration is doing right now. For example, Professor, Xing out worrisome statements by top climate scientists in this country, really the top guys, and again and again and again, going to international meetings and Xing out language and that sort of thing. Is there some scientist that's advising in the White House on which they're basing this contrarian policy?
Well, I don't think any scientist is advising them. I think they're just having absolute political advising. I suspect that President Bush's chief science advisor is Karl Rove. He seems to be the advisor on everything else. He's certainly the advisor on dealing with prosecutors, and everything looks political. So everything is filtered through politics, and forget science. In this particular case, they make up their minds, and then they just move ahead.
Tom in Texas, you're on with Professor Peter Ward.
Good evening, gentlemen. 2 points, if you don't mind, I'd like to make. First, when you speak of the carbon dioxide levels coinciding with massive extinctions in the past, why do you believe that it is the global warming that caused the mass extinctions? Was the carbon dioxide not created by massive volcanic action and the ash in the air and the blanketing of the earth, which is the traditional thought process of as to why there were extinctions? It's not the carbon dioxide; it's the effect of the volcano itself.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. CO2 at that concentration doesn't hurt anything. Nobody's dying from CO2. But what I've tried to make clear, and probably didn't do it well enough, is that what the CO2 does, it causes conditions that produces anoxic oceans. Now, we have a big lab we're just putting together now, testing the idea from a group at Penn State that the anoxic oceans themselves become the habitat for purple sulfur bacteria. These are photosynthetic bacteria that can only live in sunlight, but can only live where there's no oxygen. So you have to have zero oxygen water at the surface. Well, there's nothing like that on the planet today. But the past oceans were anoxic over and over. They only get anoxic when global temperatures are really high. When you have such conditions, these bacteria produce hydrogen sulfide gas. 200 parts per million hydrogen sulfide gas is enough to kill a human. So we have very small concentrations of this stuff coming out of the ocean is certainly capable of producing the mass extinction among animals that we see. You know, not everything dies out. There's different susceptibilities. But in these chambers at my lab now, we're testing photosynthetic properties of plants and germination of seeds, because it looks to me like the first thing that goes in these mass extinctions are land plants. And we have really good evidence at the Permian that we have something happen, and then we have a huge wedge of sediment that comes pouring into the ocean through all the rivers. Well, the only way you can get that is you can kill off plants, the roots die off, they release all the soil, and it gets pushed into the sea. And we see this pattern over and over, a land plant extinction, a big push of sediment from the land into the oceans, followed by marine extinction. You know, the marine extinction is powered by the fact that without plants on land, you don't get the springtime runoff with phosphates and nitrates, and that whole cycle breaks down. So you're absolutely right. It's certainly not CO2. And it's certainly not just straight global warming that caused these things. Now, the interesting piece, again, was found just 2 years ago in this Penn State study, where big sulfur isotope changes were found. And these
Thank you for clarifying that. I have one other comment, if you don't mind.
Yep, go ahead.
I believe, and I'm not a scientist, but I believe we got the tail wagging the dog here. It's not so much that we are producing CO2 to detrimental levels from man. I believe it is the fact that our oceans, is it not true that our oceans convert CO2 into oxygen quite a bit more than any plant on land? It's algae that does the bulk of the conversion. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, well, it's not the oceans, but as you said, it's the plants in those plants. I think some people that the forests are actually certainly as effective, and there's as much plant biomass in the forests. Much of the oceans are deserts. Near land, yes, where you have big phytoplankton blooms, you certainly get a lot of oxygen being produced, but a bigger worry, I think, is the destruction of rainforests, where an awful lot of oxygen gets converted. I don't know if the exact figures land and sea. I can certainly find out.
Okay. All right. Let's go to Edward in Austin, Texas. You're on with Professor Ward.
Hello?
Hello.
Yes. Appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you. One thing I'd like to find out is I've got a friend named Richard who's in close to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Right.
He works with the Department of Energy, and he's got a couple of PhDs. And one night we were talking, and we came across the debate. What I suggested to him was the observations I'd made, and he was doing some research on whether the burning of fossil fuels was contributing to CO2 emissions, or if there might be another source. And he was speculating highly that there was another source. And I began to say to him that I was taking flying lessons at San Marcos, and when I went over a field that was 200 acres, it was brown due to overgrazing. I had tremendous thermal, so I had there was a huge micro environmental change of thermal that was created by this, and flying over Austin to do a touch and go, I went over buildings, and it was rather frightening. I couldn't keep the elevation. I was even pitching forward to try to get down. But then I told him I made an observation that when Mexico was burning some fields, in a 2-week period, the sky was gray, was brown with what smoke and that they had put up. And I stated to him this had a bigger effect than years of automobile, of manufacturing. It literally polluted the skies. It was beyond anything that I could imagine. But so it looked like agriculture, and he was doing research on that. And maybe when we finish here, we can get off the air, because you probably ought to get his last name and see what research he did develop. But
Okay, your question is, could that be a greater effect?
I think that agriculture is having we're so highly regulated in industrial emissions and automobile emissions.
Right, caller, we don't have a lot of time here, so I've got to kind of get your question.
Okay. Well, I'd like to see how much research he has done in this, and if he's even looked at this proposition. And I fast blasted you, Art, in the first hour. Do have a solution on the IRAC bill.
All right. Professor?
Well, certainly there's a lot of pollutants. You know, I lived in Sacramento Valley where they used to burn the rice fields every fall, and that the sky would turn as brown as your listener just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But that's particulate stuff that falls out after a week or two or three. Certainly the burning of forests to produce fields, and that we get some of the smoke from Asia coming over the west coast of Seattle.
I've seen it here.
You get it too.
Yes.
This is a global phenomenon, and this certainly is adding to the entire CO2 budget of the planet, is our burning of so much forest. And so this aspect of agriculture, yes, is a huge problem.
Okay. We've had a big problem, Professor, with bees. No, we have a big problem with bees. Colony collapse disorder. Is there any chance it's climate related? Have you even thought about it?
Yeah, because I was asked the same question actually in a radio station 2 days ago. Again, it's a problem that my friend Joe Kirschnick isn't on. He's also a bee expert. He has discovered the magnetite, not only in bees but in human brains. I should hook him up with you one of these nights. Your listeners would love this guy.
Let us absolutely do that.
I'll get him on. I think he'd be wonderful for your listeners. He discovered this directionality in humans. He found that we have magnetic particles, and some people do have greater directionality. But going back to the bee question, I was asking him.
I'll tell you what, Professor, we're at the top of the hour. Hold the bee question until after the break. My guest is Professor Peter Ward. I'm Art Bell. Here I am. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. My guest is Professor Peter Ward. And in a moment, we will ask if there's any possibility that this whole bee thing is somehow climate related. We'll be right back. I think that to one degree or another, most all of us, whether we want to admit it or not, see the changes going on around us. Now, Professor, it's just asking you for a guess, but is it possible that this horrible thing going on with the bees is somehow climate related?
Well, yeah, I think it might be. Again, I was talking to friends about this today because it's everywhere, isn't it? It's not just here. We were in Australia for 4 months. Just came back with my family, and the honeybee problem is there. It's in Europe. A bee expert who happens to be here with me right now suggests it's viral. And I asked, what about parasites? There's also a parasite dealing with bees, and he thinks it's a virus. Well, viral attacks on populations, you know, they rise and they fall. They certainly could be stimulated by something that's new or strange. So why not say change in climate?
I had actually heard that Australia was one of the rare places where it wasn't going on. So it's there now, too.
Oh, yeah. Perth, Australia was being hard hit. They have fruit growers who are trying to wringing their hands saying, what are we going to do? We need honeybees.
Oh. All right, let's go to Paul in Inglewood, California. You're on with Professor Ward.
Well, hi. Thanks for having me on.
Sure.
Mr. Ward, I didn't catch your credentials at the beginning of the show, but you're not the same Ward out of Colorado, right? The one
No, that crazy nutcake, no.
Okay.
I'm a different nutcake.
Facetious, actually. I knew you were. But I noticed that you did mention that the CO2 that was trapped under the oceans, and of course, as the oceans heat up, it's being released, right?
Yeah, that's what well, Art brought that up as something that
Possibility. Caller, pause for just a second. Professor Ward is a professor of biology, professor of Earth and Space Sciences, adjunct professor of astronomy at the University of Washington in Seattle, principal investigator of the University of Washington node of the NASA Astrobiology Institute, which involves the leadership of over 25 scientists studying the probability of finding life beyond Earth. He's also senior counselor of the Paleontological Society and was awarded an affiliate professorship at the California Institute of Technology. Does that help?
No, that's pretty qualified, Art. No, it just means I got old.
One thing I do want to bring up, the world population, since we're all breathing CO2, everything that has breath, and we have gone over the billions mark now, right? And the deforestation, which you mentioned earlier, as the world's forests are being chopped up and burned down, right? And those are the things that absorb the CO2. Why wouldn't there be more CO2 in the atmosphere?
No, you're absolutely right about that. And Art brought up another good one, the fact that the oceans have really been our best friend in removing CO2, scrubbing it out. I mean, the natural systems for removing CO2 are cold seawater is the best. So let's say we warm the seawater, it doesn't take as much. As the Arctic oceans warm, they're going to get rid of their CO2. And so everything accelerates. As it gets warmer, it gets warmer. It sounds stupid, but it's reality.
Well, you know, I just caught something on the Discovery Channel the other night, and they were talking about ferns, fossils down in Antarctica. Now, so we do have a history of extreme warm periods. You know, of course, there's plate tectonics where they migrated, and I don't know how much that's had an effect with the fossils being discovered down in Antarctica. But yeah, we are concerned. But you know, when you make statements about Karl Rove and stuff, you know, picking the lawyer thing, that's kind of like, you know, push you over there in Al Gore's camp.
Well, I know, but caller, it was a reasonable question. My question was, with the attitude that we all observe of the administration about the climate, it's reasonable to ask, are they acting on scientific advice at the White House or political advice?
Well, it's one of, you know, it's you know, the answer to that. There's so much that we're so polarized today. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. And but listen, this is one place where we really cannot afford to be polarized. You know, it appears to be hard science. Now, if we want to turn that into politics, then we do it at our own peril, as the professor said. So I thought it was a reasonable question. Carolyn in New York City, you're on with Professor Ward.
Oh, hey, good morning. Thanks for putting me on.
Sure.
And first, Art, congratulations on the blessed event. We're looking forward to it.
On pins and needles here.
Yeah, we'll tell Aaron I said happy.
Thank
It
you.
was really nice when you put it on the air a while back. It was really sweet. Anyway, as to your guest there, well, I don't disagree with, you know, that climate changes are happening. I totally disagree with you have some highly speculative conclusions, and it just seems like there's a big scientific community out there that's, you know, ping-ponging back and forth, very manipulated data, and anyone who's taken Statistics 101, you know, knows how easy it is to throw a bunch of numbers together.
What do you think he has said, ma'am, that's highly speculative?
Well, first let me say, you really think that he seems to have an agenda that bioengineered solutions are the only thing that, you know, that need to be forced, you know, that need to be implemented, and they, you know, you can really, you know, put in there that it's probably going to have to be done by a one world government. Are you aware of there's been reports like the Iron Mountain report, and that's one of the scenarios that they outlined in that report, that it might be necessary to create, you know, first we all know about the alien invasion that, you know, they're saying they might have to create to force the government, but they also said that an environmental catastrophe might have to be manipulated or created to force through a one world government.
Well, okay, Professor, clearly nations are not agreeing on any of this right now, and I think that's probably what brought on the comment. Any mention of a one world government is going to put people up in arms, of course. But I don't know, Professor, how do we? This is a one world problem. So
We're gonna I mean, one world government may be the wrong way to say it. I certainly didn't mean to get people up in arms, but we're going to need a one world solution. However,
There you go.
well,
There you go. Getting governments to agree on something or anything is nearly impossible, and it may take some sort of catastrophic event to cause that, if it can even be caused. Unfortunately, as far as the climate is concerned, by the time a truly catastrophic event, clearly caused by it, occurs, it'll be too late.
exactly.
All right, Sam in Tucson, you're on with Professor Ward.
Thank you, Art. Appreciate you having me on. And I would be the first one to agree that we need to get off fossil fuels. However, I disagree with the professor, and the reason is because I've watched other presentations by other scientists, and there is one on the internet called the Global Warming Swindle, and I would challenge anybody to go to that. And
Have you seen that, Professor?
No, I haven't.
What is it in that presentation, caller, that you'd like to bring up?
Well, there are several things. One is they said the scientists there maintain that the cause is not CO2. That's the effect. The cause is the raise in temperature, and the CO2 as a result of that. The raise in CO2, the increase, is the result of the increase in temperature. And they've plotted out a graph there showing exactly that the heat increase leads the CO2 increase every time. And so, Art, what I'd like to do is forward you an email with a link on there where you can go watch that presentation.
You're welcome to do it. So your contention is the heat increase comes before the CO2 increase.
Yes.
Professor?
That's what the sign.
I'm sorry, Professor?
Well, I can't speak to that. I haven't seen those data, and it certainly would be news to me, but...
No, I'm sure you've got a computer. Check out the Global Warming Swindle, I think he said.
I've got an open mind.
Okay, good. Sam in Houston, you're on with Professor Ward.
Good morning, Art.
Hi.
I heard you talking earlier about dead zones in the ocean. I've heard it many times, caused by global warming.
Well, I'm not sure if that's accurate, but they're certainly there. I was inquiring about them.
What I'd like to talk about is, back in the 60s, over 40 years ago, I was a Navy diver. And I was diving in the San Bernardino Straits, a little over 200 feet. Now, the bottom's 7.5 miles down, but I was only down 200 feet. And for several days, I made dives. Of course, I was in the water a long time because I had to make stops coming up. I saw no sea life whatsoever during the entire period of time. And this was 40 years ago, long before global warming.
Okay.
And on the same note, I was an avid hunter till 23 years ago, but there were days I'd go out hunting and see no wildlife. There's just days that things aren't around. And I was just wondering if a person's got a movie to sell or a book to sell and they don't have negative information, nobody's going to buy it. I don't know.
Fair comment. That's fair comment. People don't buy happy books. Professor?
They don't even buy my unhappy books. San Bernardino Strait, 7.5 miles deep. That's news to me. That's pretty deep.
Sure is.
Yep.
All right. Jim in Washington, you're on with the professor. Hi.
Thank you, Art, for taking me on, and congratulations on that beautiful life and that new little girl you got coming.
Thank you.
But, Professor Ward, if we're such culprits, and we're causing all this carbon dioxide and everything with our fancy cars and our airplanes with our furnaces blowing and our trains and our boats and everything, who was the ones that was here before that caused all the carbon dioxide?
Well, nobody did it. The Earth did it. And as I tried to explain before, there have been short-term periods of really intense volcanism. Humans have never witnessed this type of volcanism, but we can certainly see the remains of it in great big fields of lava. You know, imagine the Hawaiian volcano, but over gigantic areas where it's really wet, rolling lava. So those things are short-lived, and they spew an awful lot of carbon dioxide out. And associated with those in the past have been mass extinction events. So that's my thesis.
Well, they say there's more volcanoes going off at this time, more global warming everywhere around the world than ever before.
That's not true at all. Volcanic activity is slowing through time. The Earth is getting cooler and cooler because we're losing radioactive stuff down below. There's much more activity in the past than that.
And I live out here at Union on the Hood Canal, so I know what you're talking about, the Hood Canal.
Yeah, well, that's septic, as you know. That's a lot of septics. All those vacation homes are now lining up on the Hood Canal.
Well, Art, thank you for taking my call. And my brother and my nephew were also married to Filipino women. They were very, very happy.
Thank you, Jim, and take care. To John in St. Louis.
Yes, Art. Thank you for letting me talk on your show. And I just wanted to, first of all, if you don't mind, can I answer a question you asked weeks ago about why there's so much evil in the world, and that will lead directly into my response to Mr. Ward.
If you can connect it, as the judge would say, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, no, I can connect it. First of all, let me say that I'm a Catholic priest, and I was at the Naval Academy for 2 years, and I studied oceanography, and I wanted to major in meteorology, but then I chose religious life. But I've always been fascinated by meteorology, and I just wanted to quote to you a meteorological forecast that was made 1,500 years ago. Now, you know the cliche that, thank you, Mr. Weatherman, we just got done shoveling 15 inches of partly cloudy out of my driveway.
Yeah.
See, the science is not exact, but I want to give you a statement made 1,500 years ago. Keep in mind, I'm a Catholic priest.
No, go ahead.
And I'm taking liberties with this because Al Gore's been invoked, and he said this is a spiritual issue, this is a moral issue. So I'm taking just a little liberty, but I'm being scientific. Let me explain. Pope St. Gregory the Great said this, all right, in regard to what our Lord said in Luke chapter 21, verse 9. You shall hear of wars and seditions. You know, you ask why there's so much evil in the world. Be not terrified. These things must first come to pass, but the end is not yet present. And then he said to them, nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be great earthquakes in divers places, and pestilences, and famines, and terrors from heaven. And there shall be great signs. Now let me go to the meteorologist, Pope St. Gregory the Great. He points out, he says, behold how our Lord says, when you shall hear of wars and seditions, be not terrified. These things must first come to pass, but the end is not yet presently. We should weigh these words of our Redeemer in which he tells us that we must suffer things both from without and from within. This is coming to the weather. For wars are waged by a foreign enemy, and seditions arise among fellow citizens. When, therefore, he would warn us of troubles from within and from without, our Lord tells us what shall be done on one hand by our enemies, on the other hand by our brethren. But to these evils that go before, since the end shall not follow immediately, he adds, nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be great earthquakes in divers places, and pestilences and famines and terrors from heaven. And there shall be great signs.
All right, Father, we're almost out of time. That's a great sign.
I'm almost to that point. The last tribulation shall be preceded by many tribulations, and these evils going before in quick succession point to the unending evils that are to follow them. And therefore, after the wars and seditions, the end shall not be immediately, because many evils must go before to announce the world that shall have no end. And here's the weather forecast. But since so many signs of tribulation are mentioned, it behooves us briefly, emphasis, to consider each one by itself. For of necessity we shall suffer some from heaven, some from earth, and some from the elements, and some from men. First he says, nation shall rise against nation, and this, behold, the disturbances among men. There shall be great earthquakes in divers places. This concerns the wrath from heaven. There shall be pestilences.
Father, I'm sorry, we're out of time.
This speaks of bodily disorders. There shall be, I'm almost there, Art, just a minute, just a couple more sentences. This speaks of bodily disorders. There shall be famines. In this we shall see barrenness of the earth, and terrors from heaven, and tempests. This refers to the disturbances of the atmosphere. For since all things must come to an end before the consummation, all things shall be troubled. And we who have sinned in all things we shall be punished, that it may be fulfilled as it is written, the whole world shall fight with him against the unwise.
Father, did you tell all this to the screener?
Pardon me?
Did you tell all this to the screener?
No, this is leading into my point. I've completed that part. Now I'm going to hit
Very quickly. We're out of time.
Okay, very quickly. All right. You claim that you're a scientist, and yet you bring in all these political slams like against President Bush and this. If you listen to Glenn Beck's show, who exposed the climate of fear hidden agenda of global warming, who interviewed many scientists who are in the fraternity you spoke of, the fraternity of scientists, who are told what to say, not what they have observed, or to lose their job.
Okay, all right, we're going to have to hold it there. Yikes. Yikes. All right, I'm not going to ask you to respond to that because, Professor Ward, I assume you have just told us what you absolutely believe to be true based on the science.
Well, yeah, I didn't know what the question was there.
Nor did I. Nor would I even endeavor to argue with it. At any rate, listen, my friend, I want to thank you for being on the program tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure. And your new book is?
Under a Green Sky.
Under a Green Sky.
I'll tell you really quickly, all my undergraduates, my stature has gone way up. This is the 4th time I've been on your show. I get these emails saying, you're an Art Bell, you are cool.
My friend, thank you for being here, and be cool.
Thanks.
Good night. All right, folks, that's it. We'll take about a 24-hour break and do this all over again. Have a good night. From the high desert and the great American Southwest, I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world's time zones, prolific and all covered ever so well by this program, Coast to Coast AM. I'm Art Bell. It's great to be here. I'll be guiding you through the remainder of this weekend, and then we'll turn it back to George for the weekday fare as Coast just rolls on 7 days a week. Well, all right, let's look at the news. And actually, it's not all bad, depending on your point of view, for a change. The lead story, Colts tame Bears for Super Bowl victory. Wet and wild. And perfect winning conditions for Peyton Manning and the Indianapolis Colts finally did it. Super Bowl gets his ring. A team built for indoors found its footing on a rain-soaked track and outplayed the Chicago Bears. You wouldn't have expected it, right? Bears should have won that game outside. To win the NFL title, 29-17 Sunday. The Colts far less sloppy, particularly their star quarterback, who proved that he can indeed win the big game, the biggest game. So that's a lead story. Senator McCain sought to weaken support for a resolution that's opposing President Bush's Iraq war strategy Sunday, saying proponents are intellectually dishonest. On the eve of a possible congressional showdown on Iraq strategy, McCain contends the bipartisan proposal amounts to nothing more than a demoralizing vote of no confidence in the U.S. military. A gospel-singing, shouting crowd competed with the sounds of hammers, chainsaws, and dump trucks Sunday as parishioners of a church obliterated by a tornado gathered around the rubble to remember the dead and pray for the strength to rebuild. The Lady Lake Church of God's splintered wreckage has become a rallying point in this rural area of Central Florida. Indeed hard hit by 3 tornadoes that killed 20 people and destroyed hundreds of homes on Friday. Bad weather. The U.S. Command has ordered changes in flight operations, all this after 4 helicopters went down. The enemy is boasting they've got something new, and indeed they've brought down 4 helicopters, so we're going to make changes. Boats ferried supplies to desperate residents of Indonesia's flood-stricken capital on Sunday as rivers burst their banks following days of rain and rain and rain. At least 20 people have been killed and almost 340,000 forced from their homes. Hundreds of people scrambled to the second floors of their homes to escape rising waters. Some found themselves trapped. Others refused to leave despite warnings that the muddy floodwaters, running over 13 feet deep in places, yikes, may yet rise further in the coming days. A revolt Are you part of it? Against a national driver's license began last month in Maine and now is quickly spreading to other states. The Maine legislature on January 26 overwhelmingly passed a resolution objecting to the Real ID Act of 2005. The federal law sets a national standard for driver's licenses that requires states to link their record-keeping systems to national databases. Let's see, why do we hate that? I guess anything that's a national database, people don't like. A whooping crane was spotted alive Sunday after it was believed killed with 17 others in severe Florida storms, according to an organizer of a migratory project. Organizers received a signal from a transmitter on the young male crane Saturday night, then again on Sunday near where the endangered birds were kept in Citrus County, Florida. Later Sunday, they saw the survivor with 2 Sandhill cranes, said Rachel Levin, a spokesperson for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So a little bit of good news out of otherwise a disaster in Florida. I wonder if we're going to go to war with Iran. Citing Iranian government involvement with Iraqi militias, as well as Tehran's nuclear ambitions, the Bush administration has shifted to offense in its confrontation with Iran, building up the U.S. military in the Persian Gulf, promising more aggressive moves against Iranian operatives in Iraq and Lebanon. The behind-the-scenes struggle between the two nations could explode into open warfare over just a single misstep, according to analysts and U.S. military officials. So, that kind of a statement sounds a little like we're about to have a war. Maybe not, but I have this feeling that we really want to clean up the situation in Iran. I wonder how you feel about that. Then we're going to be fighting on 2 fronts. And by the way, those of you, we're going to go to, I had kind of an idea. How would some of you like to go up to the website, coasttocoastam.com, and ask me a question by Fast Blast? Maybe I'll just sit here and answer a few questions by Fast Blast. And, of course, I'll take some calls. So those of you that know the numbers, the portals, feel free to go ahead and dial in. The rest of you who would like to ask, some people are too shy to ask the question they really want to ask. So go ahead and pose one on Fast Blast, and in this first hour, I'll see if I can answer it. By the way, in the second hour, Gordon Michael Scallion is going to be here. He has traditionally talked about Earth changes whenever we've had him on. Tonight, he's going to switch a little bit, and he's going to be talking about the subject of possession. That's right, possession. So that should be very, very interesting. Possession is a very interesting topic to me. Anyway, anybody wanting to pose a question they're too shy to ask anywhere else, go ahead and pose it on Fast Blast, and I'll see if I can answer it. The February 2nd report by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that human activities in the form of greenhouse gas emissions are the cause of global warming. Some scientists think we only have a decade or so to fix the problem. Actually, just a decade. Meanwhile, major oil companies are desperately now trying to debunk that study. In fact, CNN is reporting that an ExxonMobil think tank sent letters, I mentioned this yesterday, and Whitley just got up, sent letters to scientists offering them $10,000 if they would criticize the findings of the new UN study. Is this the type of think tank that will be attached to President Bush's proposed $500 billion presidential library? In The Independent, Steve Connor reports that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere and the corresponding increases in average global temperatures are higher than at any time over the past 650,000 years, meaning that the IPCC has therefore concluded that global warming that we have observed in recent decades is the likely result of human activity. The IPCC reports and points out that 11 of the 12 warmest years since 1850, have occurred since 1995. Connor says, if we want to avoid catastrophic increases in sea levels, we must attempt to limit the melting of the giant ice sheets off Greenland and West Antarctica. If one or both of those ice sheets should disintegrate, sea levels would rise disastrously and inundate most of the major cities of the world, as well as low-lying and densely populated countries like Bangladesh. Now, they did say most of the major cities of the world. That's because the majority of them are, of course, on the shore. Recent microfossil evidence casts new and fresh doubt as to whether an asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs at all. This is according to micropaleontologist Gerta Keller of Princeton University in Princeton, New Jersey, of course, and her collaborators. Their analysis of ancient marine-dwelling microorganisms called Foraminifera suggests that global warming caused by massive volcanism in India led to dwarfing of all species, and indeed a gradual decrease in their diversity beginning about 400,000 years prior to the mass extinction. So there you have it. Was it or was it not a rock? They say not. Now, of course, we had Seth on last night. As you know, he's a great doubter about anything being already here. At 5:30 on Thursday, 10 to 15 UFOs were indeed spotted over North London in the inner city district of Islington. The Islington police said they started receiving phone calls only minutes after the objects began appearing. 34-year-old market stall trader Alistair McAllister, who witnessed the object, said, quote, "I just picked up my son from a nursery. I'd come out the door when I noticed what was going on in the sky. There were a whole group of them, 10 or 15, moving together. My first impression was they reminded me of a squadron of airplanes in formation, but they didn't have proper formation. They were all moving at the same speed. I thought for a while that something was happening in the center of London. Bombs and planes crossed my mind, but I realized very quickly they didn't look like any kind of aircraft I'd ever seen before. They were coming from the north and moving south. And then they kind of just stopped and were hovering. There was no sound. They seemed to fade away, and I saw more coming. Then they stopped. It lasted, the whole affair, for about 10 minutes. So we're having UFO reports right now from virtually all over the world, in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world. It just keeps on coming. But apparently there's still not enough evidence for the scientists. I guess for the scientists, a UFO would have to appear every night in the same place on a regularly scheduled basis and just keep appearing and appearing and appearing and appearing. In a moment, we're back with fast blasts and phone calls right after this. All right, Paul in East Rockaway, New York asked, "Hi, Art, what is life like in Pahrump? I'm thinking of moving there." Well, the answer is good. Very good. We have excellent restaurants. You have elbow room here. Of course, Las Vegas is wonderful, but it's a big city, and I kind of like elbow room for antennas, and things like that. He goes on, "Tell us about your Vietnam orphan airlift." When I worked for KENI in Anchorage, Alaska, we organized at the end of the very bitter end of the Vietnam War, and raised enough money to get a charter plane to Vietnam and brought back 100 plus orphans. These were mixture children, that had been fathered by U.S. Military people, and were not going to be particularly well and warmly welcomed by the North Vietnamese, who were quickly taking over at that point. So we brought them back to the U.S., and they were adopted out, and I'll tell you, in recent years, I've been hearing from many of them who have now graduated from college and wanted to look back on how they got here and contacted me and contacted KENI and the newspaper in Anchorage and so forth and so on. So that's what we did. There's not a whole lot more to tell, except it sure is cool to hear from them and find out so many have done so well. Patrick in Seattle asks, if the government art took you into its confidence and let you know all the secrets it maintains about UFOs with one restriction, you couldn't tell your audience, would you take them up on their offer? Sure, Patrick, I would. And I'd lie right through my teeth to them. Now, there's no worry about this because, frankly, they're not going to come to me. They know much better than that, and I would tell my audience. So it would be very foolish. If you're listening, government, don't come to me and tell me any of your secrets about UFOs, because I will laugh. So I'll try to keep answering some of these questions as we go along. In the meantime, Wildcard Line 1, Jeff in St. Louis, you're on the air.
Thank you for taking my call this morning.
You bet.
I have two quick comments. One is about this national ID.
Yes, sir.
I think it's they want to try to keep voting fraud out, and I think some kind of national voting ID would be a good idea.
It might not be a bad idea. I'm not in total disagreement with you. What's wrong with a national ID?
Nothing really. If this shows you're a U.S. citizen.
Why does it scare people? I don't get it.
I have no clue why it would scare people. But
I guess they feel it's a step toward a one world government.
Yeah, probably. And then my other comment is about Iran.
Yes, sir.
I do think we are heading close to a conflict with Iran. Because once again, the UN isn't doing its job. And if it probably did its job the first time around, we probably wouldn't be in Iraq in the first place.
The UN never does its job.
No, and then we usually end up cleaning up their messes.
I don't think you can name one time when the UN has actually started and finished something.
Yeah, we usually have to clean up their mess.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much for the call. I hope that we don't go to war with Iran. We don't need another war, but if it has to be, it has to be. David in Louisville, Kentucky asks, are you taking Erin sightseeing around the country so she doesn't think the whole place looks like Saudi Arabia? Do you know what she thought it would be like here? She thought it would be like portions of Kuwait, and she was thinking we'd have a house among large hills of blowing, drifting sand. That was her image of the desert, and she was happily surprised to find out, indeed, that is not at all what it's like. Luella here in Peru, I'll be darned, listening to KMYE FM 95.1, says, did you hear anything about 3 cougars sighted in South Peru? Heard about it on TV. A female with some good-sized cubs. No, I had not heard about it, but I sure would love to see them myself at a bit of a distance. Tim in Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Is that me, Art?
Yes.
Yes, Art. Good. Thank you for taking my call. Art, I'd like to say that in terms of the going kind of backwards here, the ID thing, I've heard that the new IDs are going to be related to biological DNA.
Well, they'll probably look at, who knows what, something hopefully very good, DNA or perhaps an eyeball scan or whatever.
And it just seems that that's getting, I don't know, it just kind of seems like if they take a piece of your DNA and put it on some sort of a card or a little chip on this thing that,
You're not afraid of it?
Well, I am afraid of it. It's kind of a little bit too sci-fi for me, but that isn't why I called. I called to talk to you kind of more about, shall we say, the feeling that things are kind of on a downswing now. Do you get the same feeling that I do, that things are moving real fast right now? I walk down the streets, people don't say hello anymore. There's a fear factor. The color levels of the terrorism levels. It's like, to me, I'm envisioning that there's a master plan going on here. Now, I know it sounds conspiratorial and secret society type stuff, but it really does seem like a whole bunch of stuff is going on behind the scenes to make certain, shall we say, things happen. And it seems like there is
like a master plan. You know, it seems like there's this thing that's going on.
A secret cabal of people running the world?
Well, I've read a lot, you know, many of your guests. I've ordered many of the books, things of this nature. And when you put it all together, it seems like there's 4 or 5 regions of the globe that they want to kind of control. It does seem that there's this globalist kind of theory. I'll use the term theory, but it's beyond theory now. It does seem that there's kind of the Pacific Rim, the North American, the Mideast, there's these areas of the globe that they want to control. And you know as well as I do that there's only going to be certain people that are going to be controlling it, and it is going to be the haves and the have-nots.
In other words, nothing's going to change, is really what you want to say, and that's really true. We are headed toward a global economy. I've said this many times before. We began as little towns and groups trading with each other. Then we began trading between states. Then we began trading between regions. Now we're to the point where we're trading between hemispheres. We have hemispheric trading blocks, right? And I suppose the next step from that is one single global economy. And I suppose you'll have to have identification in that. And what will it be? Well, probably some sort of, I don't know, eyeball scan or perhaps DNA. I hope whatever it is they do, they make it so hard that identity theft is no longer possible. If they actually get to that point, might all be worth it. I don't know. I'm Art Bell. Here I am. Chad in Chino Valley asks, did you ever get an HD, DVD, or Blu-ray player? The answer is no, Chad, and I really, really am hot to get one, but I don't think they're available just yet. And if they are, you can certainly order them from Japan. There's not a lot of, there are not a lot, as far as I know, movies available in that format as yet, but as soon as it happens, I will be ready. I love HD. I don't know how many of the rest of you, since I've been out of the country in the Philippines and now back, have obtained HD televisions, but what a difference. They are truly awesome. In a moment, back to the questions and the phones. Joe I'll just give his first name, in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, said, hey, Art, do you ever listen to Rush or Sean Hannity? They have experts that don't believe in global warming. Why don't you ever have some of those guests that believe the other way around? Well, Joe, rather, they're towing a political line. That's what they do, both of them, Rush included. He toes a conservative political line. And right now, the conservative political line is that's not happening. Of course, that ignores reality. Now, I think as far as scientists are concerned, it's getting very near 100%. Not every last one of them, but there's pretty much a consensus out there now, Joe, that global warming is simply happening. Not forecast to happen, not just in the models, Joe, but actually happening. West of the... No, make that first-time caller line. John in Whittier, California. You're on the air.
Hi, Art.
Hi.
Thank you guys for taking my call.
Sure.
I wanted to turn the tables here for a minute and actually talk about our UFO extraterrestrial files. I'm actually referring to the Disclosure Project. You're familiar with that, correct?
Stephen Greer's.
Yes. Yes. In that he talked about sending something to Congress, actually to President Bush, about the disclosure of the files. Do you know when, they run? I mean, he's not going to, obviously, they're not going to come out and say what's really going on, but do you know where that's at right now?
No, it's been a while since I've talked with Stephen, and I guess I need to get an update. So, when was the last time you heard him on?
Well, the last thing I've seen is Fast Walkers. That's a documentary. That's about all I've seen of him. That's the latest I've seen of him.
Okay. Well, I guess we need to get him back on coast and find out what he has sent the administration. That's interesting. I didn't know something was on the way. West of the Rockies, Fred in Happy Valley, Alaska. You're on the air.
Hey, thanks, Art.
Yes, sir.
How you doing?
Hi.
I got a problem here. I've got somebody. I know this isn't what you're doing now, but I've got somebody that he makes his presence known. He's a ghost. Or specter,
you have a ghost.
whatever
You have a
want to
ghost.
call him.
You have a ghost.
It kind of bothers me. I'm doing a house. It's a place I used to live in.
You mean you're building a house?
Well, we're remodeling.
Remodel. Okay.
Yeah. And he's making his presence more and more known.
Maybe he doesn't like your taste in remodeling.
This I know for a fact.
Maybe he
There's
doesn't
somebody
like...
out there that is.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Maybe he doesn't like what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know if he likes it or not. And he's literally, he's been getting to where he's showing himself more and more all the time. I have two dogs that I have here with me. One of them is a dog I'm taking care of for somebody else, and one of them is mine. And mine actually knows when he's here. But there's somebody out there that actually knows what he is. And he is a specter. You don't understand what I'm saying, specter?
No.
He's a ghost.
That I got.
All right. I don't understand. There's somebody else out there that actually knows what I'm saying.
Well, okay, then that may be the person you need to speak with, because I'm not quite able to put together what you're saying beyond the fact that there's a ghost involved somewhere in the remodeling of your house. And I'm certainly not an expert on what you do when you get a ghost. East of the Rockies, Frank in Michigan, you're on the air.
Hi, Art.
Hi.
Mega Million 6 Below Zero greetings from Bridget, Michigan.
That is cold.
Hey, Art, I have, instead of a prediction, which I failed to get into on the show, a wish. You have a colleague by the name of Stan Monteith, Radio Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
He interviewed a Green Beret by the name of Colonel Dan Marvin, who authored a book, Expendable Elite. And it chronicles Colonel Dan Marvin's experiences in Vietnam. Really wish you could interview him sometime. And then there's an IDF veteran by the name of Barry Shamish, who discovered in his research who it was that exactly murdered Itzhak Rabin over in Israel. Oh, and by the way, you mentioned possession. Dan Monteith also interviewed a fellow who did a documentary called They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll. Remember Malachi said that people he had known had actually made willing compacts with Satan?
Yes, perfectly possessed, I believe was the phrase he used.
Yeah, well, according to this author of They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll, many of the name brand rock and roll celebs have done that. But I thought that would make for some very interesting interviews in the future.
Well, it might, and I'd be glad to look into it. Sold their souls for rock and roll, huh? I kind of miss the way rock was. I even miss disco a little bit. I wonder if anybody else out there... A lot of people will not admit it, but there's a lot of good music that actually came out of disco. But then again, I was always a kind of a rhythm person. Daniel in Portland, Oregon, you've achieved the air. Hi.
Hi, Art. I called tonight. I wanted to know why you guys aren't doing a Earth healing session, love session.
Why we're not doing a love session?
Well, just like, you know, like...
No, I don't know. Explain to me exactly what you mean.
Well, I mean, just, healing, earth healing sessions, encouraging people to, drop their weapons and love their fellow man and all that good stuff. Like mass consciousness, get them into the meditative state, sort of like with the weather thing that you did.
Because, as you know, I stopped those experiments, and because I didn't really know what I was doing, and I still don't. Do you?
Well, no, but I just can't imagine anything, bad coming from doing that.
Well, suppose in the world of the good guys and the bad guys, we encouraged a bunch of the good guys to drop their guns, and then they were shot by the bad guys.
Well, yeah, I thought about that too. I don't know.
Well, that's the whole point, sir. We both don't know. And if there was really some way that I could be sure that the intent that we projected as a group would have the desired consequence and nothing more, believe me, I'd be all over it. But we don't know that, do we? Roger in London, Ontario, you're on the air.
All right, Bill, how are you today, sir?
Quite well.
Fantastic. On that disco theme, when I first heard your show a couple of years ago and I heard the opening song, I go, wow, I'm going to hear a disco show. So, yeah, I could tell you're into disco quite a bit.
Yeah, I really am.
Cool.
I enjoyed disco, and as much as people put it down, really, an awful lot of good came out of it, and I kind of wonder why it suddenly died. Why didn't it just sort of hang around the way other music does and, have its little corner of the world?
Well, definitely you got it in the evening. It's got its own little corner on your show with the opening act. Now, I give you a shout. Sorry to change the gears there. I wanted to talk to you about, did you get a feel for the UN report that came out recently about global warming, and that basically they put it smack dab in the lap of humans in our action and inaction?
Yes.
Of that cause.
Yes, I
Now,
did.
did you have a show last week? I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I just want to get a feel for it. Did you say that, it's not necessarily because of pollution, but rather because of a change that's happening in the world? I think you had a guest on that said it's every 1,500 years that's causing it to happen.
Look, there's as many opinions out there as there are body orifices, and my view is, and has been for 2 or 3 years now at least, maybe longer, that it could be the hand of man, or it could be natural, cyclical change in our climate. It really doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, it's happening. So, from my point of view, we should stop arguing about it and begin doing something about it. And that means perhaps we can't stop what's going on, so we need to sort of project what's going to happen and then begin growing crops in areas that are going to have yields for us so we don't go hungry. We're going to begin to have to inhabit areas that are going to be inhabitable, and or perhaps leave some areas that are going to be underwater or otherwise changed. That's what humans can do. We can think. We have brains. We should look ahead and we should begin to act, because it is happening. Andrea in Los Angeles, you're on the air.
Oh, hi, Art. Have you heard of the Tesla electric car, the Roadster?
No.
Oh, well, it just came out, I guess, maybe 6 months ago. And it's supposed to be able to take a charge for at least 200 miles. And you don't have to recharge it. And
Well, I knew there were electric cars, Andrea. Who makes it?
it's made in California, Northern California, by the Tesla Motors Company. And it's been named after Nikola Tesla, of course.
Okay.
Well, and I think it's like maybe $50,000 or something like that. But would you ever buy an electric car?
I might. I certainly might. The thing you have to look into with electric cars is, you mentioned a couple of 100 miles on a charge. How long you have to charge it for. Remember also that when you're using electricity, you're still using fossil fuels. That electricity doesn't come out of the socket magically. It is generated probably by fossil fuels or some other method that contributes global warming. So, you are not necessarily escaping and using. It'll appear certainly clean energy to you, but that energy, Andrea, had to be generated somewhere. So it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Amos in Oregon, you're on the air.
Hello?
Yes.
Me?
You.
Oh, hi.
Oh, hi.
Oh, Mr. Bell. All right. Amos here.
Yes, Amos.
I sent you a magnetic motor to you. Do you got it?
You sent me a magnetic motor.
Yeah, yeah.
Amos? No, I have not received it. Where did you send it, Amos?
I sent it from Hamilton.
Not from where?
Oh,
to where?
to your place.
My place where?
Philippines.
You sent it to the Philippines.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. When did you do that?
Just before you came after Christmas.
Just before I came back to the U.S.?
Yeah, I never knew.
Bad timing, Amos.
Huh?
Bad timing.
Oh, geez. But it should be there anyway, when you get back.
Yeah, by what method did you send it?
Just regular mail.
Regular mail?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Regular mail takes about a month to get to the Philippines, Amos.
I'm keeping a day every time. Is it 79 days, 80 days now? It should be there. And
no, I'm afraid that it may be, but I'm not there.
Oh, you don't go back there and oh.
Well, eventually, Amos, yes, I will get back there, and who knows, maybe there'll be a giant pile of mail, and there'll be a magnetic motor.
Yeah, it's small. It's an energy device. There's no pollution and nothing like that, but you might like it, you know.
Oh, well, I might. All right, Amos, well, listen, thank you very much for the effort, and believe me, I will look for it when I get back there. Tom in Vista, California, you're on the air.
Hey, Art, man, great to talk to you. I got this great invisibility story to tell you, but at a later date. I was watching the football game today, and I saw the symbols on the football helmets. And the Indianapolis Colts had a horseshoe shaped, a U shaped, and the Chicago Bears had the a C-shaped, and I just wanted to know if you or any of your listeners had any kind of inference that this was a very peculiar shape. Hello?
Yes, I'm listening. I'm just, I'm wondering what it is you're really asking. In other words, the U shape is to, I think, represent a horseshoe, since they're called the Colts, and in the case of Chicago, YSC would be, obviously for.
Yes, that's correct. I was.
So, what is it you're asking?
What I'm asking is, I'm asking your listeners, perhaps if I'm reading in the.
You'll get it out. I really want to hear this.
I do. It was just a peculiar thing that I noticed on both of the helmets. That if you were to
turn the C on its side, it would be just like the
on the side and the horseshoe on its side. It was the same.
All right. Yes, I guess those who watch the game may or may not have noticed that. Max in Canada, you're on the air. Hello.
Hi, Art.
Hi.
One question is, how come you don't do Trees of Trash anymore?
I don't know. Just haven't done it, but I'll get around to it. I'll do it.
Okay, and the other one is, the lady was going talking about electric cars. Have you seen the movie Who Killed the Electric Car?
No.
Oh, it's a very good, interesting story about the...
Well, who killed the electric car?
Yeah.
No, I'm asking. I'm asking. Who killed the electric car?
CARB out of California, GM. If you watch
the
the
usual.
movie, yeah, if you watch the movie, they cover it quite well.
I see.
But there's also another company out of California. It's called Phoenix Motor Company, and they have full-size trucks. And they're talking about $55,000 for those things.
Really?
Yeah.
85,000. And they go how far?
They said about 200 miles on a charge.
100 miles on a charge. Sounds like the Tesla car.
Yeah, different company.
Uh-huh. Well, maybe we're moving in that direction, but again, for what it's worth, ladies and gentlemen, please think about this when you think about electric cars. That electricity doesn't magically get to your socket to charge your car. It has to be generated. And the generation of electricity, many, not always, but many times, involves the use of fossil fuels. We have factories, and so there's sort of the great combination of how we generate energy eventually gets to your electric socket. Then it charges your batteries. So you're still using energy that's pretty much generated the good old-fashioned way. That doesn't really necessarily solve anything, but it feels good on a local basis. Coming up in a moment, Gordon Michael Scallion on possession. Here I am, and I've got an announcement for you. From now on, beginning next weekend, whenever I'm doing open lines, it's going to be unscreened open lines. No more screening when we do open lines. We're just going to let it ring, and I'm going to just pick it up the way I used to do in the old days. I can do that here, so we'll let the screener go take a little coffee break or whatever it is a screener does when the screener isn't screening, and we'll do on-the-screen calls beginning next weekend. Coming up in a moment, Gordon Michael Scallion is a futurist, and he's author of the Future Map of North America. I've got a big copy of it out in my hot tub room. He is the editor of Intuitive Flash. That's a newsletter which contains his latest insights on the future and how consciousness is forming that future. In 1979, he experienced a health crisis, which led him on a path of self-discovery and eventually resulted in his ability to access higher states of consciousness. This access allows him to view future realities where you will get glimpses of what our world will be like, from technology and future societies to the consciousness of children born with super mind powers. So coming up in a moment, Gordon Michael Scallion is going to move away a little bit, although we'll get an update on Earth changes. That's what he's concentrated on pretty much. And tonight we're going to talk about possession. Stay right where you are. Gordon Michael Scallion, it has been a long time, my friend. Welcome back.
Welcome back yourself.
That's true.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my notes before I came over here to my studio, and I see that we've been doing this almost a decade, or over a decade.
Don't remind me, but you're right. It's been about that long.
Yeah, I remember back then we were talking about the things that were going to happen with earth changes, tornadoes and floods and ice melting, things of that nature.
And it all seems to be underway.
It does seem that way.
Gordon, before we turn to an unusual topic for you, possession certainly is unusual for you, what about all the predictions you made? Now, certainly to some degree, it has all started to become true. Is there any way to sort of reflect on what you told me so long ago? I recall you said I would be guiding people out of California after a terrible disaster, a big earthquake, and so forth and so on. Is that still all ahead of us?
Yeah, I believe it is. I don't believe it's changed. The timeline is difficult. When a visionary or a futurist or anyone looks at some prophetic vision of potential realities, it's hard to get timelines. You have to look at like little signs along the way that might indicate, when something might happen. So, I was really off, as was many others like Casey. We all saw this happening around the turn of the century, and it didn't. Yet the patterns that we spoke about are happening. So it seems like it's occurring, but it's occurring later. It seems like it's moving now, and we're heading towards something. I mean, we're getting tornadoes where we just didn't have them before, and we're seeing massive melt-offs. So
it's horrible.
Yeah,
absolutely horrible. And the changes are clear, and I think even most of the scientists now are on board. There are, of course, a few detractors, the administration and a few others, but most of the scientists are pretty much on board now and saying it's underway. It's not in the future. It's happening now.
There is a consensus now. I mean, there's still a group that the argument now is not so much that global warming, whether it's here or not, because that was the big issue. Was the conspiracy issue, and now the issue is what's really causing it. So now consciousness has changed. It's got to the point where it's grown enough so that we see the reality of what's happening. We just turn on TV every day and we see another aspect of it. But now the question is, what's really causing it?
That's right. Do you have any input on that yourself?
I think it's a duality of things that are going on. I believe that the Earth's a pole shift that I have been speaking about for since '79. I believe it has occurred. I believe it's begun, and that the core of the Earth itself is slowly shifted its position. So we can see the core is moving at one speed, and the mantle working moving at another speed.
Right.
This is shifting somewhat, and that's what I believe is triggering the increase in temperature from the core outward. At the same time, we see a relationship with the sun. I mean, we almost have a double sunspot cycle. We're seeing a lot of activity on the sun that we just hadn't noticed before. Now that we have satellites pointing at it and studying it, we can see the patterns.
It's true, and now the scientists are predicting this coming sun cycle to be perhaps one of the biggest ever.
I believe it's going to, back in the 50s, the IGY years, I was really, like you, I was very active with ham radio and emergency preparedness. And so I was very active during that sunspot cycle. Well, I think this one is going to be many times that. I think
many times?
Yeah, I think we're going to be wrapped in charts on this one. I think this cycle